Captain Maya Torres sat rigid in the cockpit of her Apache helicopter, the hum of the engines vibrating through her body, a steady pulse against the rhythm of her heart. She scanned the horizon as the desert sun dipped low, casting long shadows over. The rugged terrain below her squadron had been deployed on a routine reconnaissance mission, but intelligence had hinted at enemy activity nearby. The tension was thick in the air, electric like a storm about to break. Her hands tightened on the controls, fingers brushing over the switches and buttons. She knew the Apache like an extension of herself. Every beep and flicker on the instrument panel a language only she could understand. The desert stretched out in all directions, endless and unforgiving. But Maya was no stranger to its challenges. She had trained for years to master this machine, to navigate its blind spots and push beyond its limits. Suddenly, the calm shattered. A sharp blare erupted from the radar screen, red dots multiplying faster than she could count. 3 enemy fighter jets were closing in with terrifying speed, each one sleek deadly like predators on the hunt. Their approach was calculated precise, blocking any chance of retreat. Her squadron had relied on her to be the shield, the spear, the one who could turn the tide. The radio crackled with urgent voices, but Maya barely heard them. Her focus narrowed to the enemy jets blinking closer and closer, each one a threat to not only her life, but the safety of her comrades. Below, she adjusted her visor, flicking to infrared mode to pierce the growing dusk. The fighters were fast, but the Apache was agile in the hands of a pilot who refused to be outmatched. Then, without warning, a violent jolt rocked the helicopter. A missile streaked past, narrowly missing the tail rotor, sending a shower of sparks into the twilight. The cockpit alarms screamed warnings flashing red, all systems on high alert. The enemy was no ordinary opponent. This was something far more dangerous. Maya realized the battle had just begun. Her breath quickened as she pushed the throttle forward, climbing sharply into the sky, weaving through jagged cliffs and narrow canyons. The enemy fighters were relentless, closing the distance, firing bursts of tracer rounds that stitched glowing lines through the air. Her hands moved instinctively, working the weapon systems, locking onto the first jet, her pulse hammering in her ears. But as she prepared to fire, her targeting computer flickered and the screen went dark. A sudden burst of static scrambled her sensors, leaving her blind and vulnerable. The enemy had deployed an electronic attack, something she had never encountered before. Panic threatened to rise, but Maya forced it down, drawing on every ounce of training and grit. The sky was no longer just a battlefield. It was a deadly maze where one wrong move could mean the end. She spotted the silhouette of the lead jet cutting through the fading light, and with no time to hesitate, she fired a missile locking onto its heat signature. The explosion rocked the air, sending debris scattering across the sky, but the fight was far from over. The other 2 jets banked hard, splitting apart, disappearing into the clouds like ghosts. The eerie silence that followed was broken only by the whine of her damaged helicopter systems. Maya felt a cold, prickling sensation at the back of her neck, as if invisible eyes were watching, waiting for her next move. The radio was dead. No response. No backup. The desert night was closing in, and the true danger was still out there, waiting in the shadows of the sky. Maya's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts as she fought to regain control of her Apache. The missile strike had rocked her helicopter, systems scrambling the targeting computers and jamming the radios, leaving her isolated and blind in the vast, unforgiving sky. The once steady hum of the engine now sounded like a strained growl beneath her fingertips. Warning signs flickered across the instrument panel, but she refused to surrender. She scanned frantically, looking for any sign of the remaining enemy jets, their silhouettes swallowed by the growing darkness and swirling clouds. Her heart pounded with adrenaline and fear, but her training kicked in, overriding panic with calm precision. She adjusted her grip on the flight controls, coaxing the Apache through a sudden dive, weaving between towering rocky spires that rose from the desert floor like ancient sentinels watching. The unfolding battle. The enemy fighters pursued relentlessly their missile trails, carving fiery streaks through the sky as they closed in from all directions. Maya's eyes darted from radar to horizon, calculating angles and distances her mind. Racing to anticipate their next move, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her like the heavy desert heat, but she would not falter. Her mission was clear: to protect her squadron and herself at all costs. Her targeting system flickered, back to life momentarily only to die again, leaving her with nothing but raw instinct and years of experience. She reached for the manual controls, switching off the automated systems, relying solely on sight and sound, the way pilots had done before. Technology had taken over. The desert wind whipped past the open cockpit vents, carrying with it the distant roar of engines and the faint crackle of gunfire somewhere below. Suddenly, Maya spotted a flash of movement in the corner of her eye, a sleek fighter jet banking sharply to line up an attack. The pilot was skilled and calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her hands tightened on the controls as she prepared to counterstrike, but before she could react, a sudden burst of electronic interference scrambled her instruments again, causing a momentary blackout that sent her spiraling downward. The Apache shuddered, violently caught in the wake of an unseen force. Maya fought to steady the machine, her muscles straining. As she pulled back on the controls, narrowly avoiding a catastrophic crash into the rocky canyon floor. The enemy was using advanced electronic warfare tactics that pushed her skills to the breaking point, but she refused to give in, regaining altitude. Maya spotted her chance a brief opening as one of the enemy jets flew too close, cutting through the swirling dust and smoke. Like a hawk, she locked onto the target, engaging the missile launcher and firing a heat-seeking rocket that streaked through the sky with deadly precision. The explosion that followed lit up the horizon flames and smoke spiraling upward, signaling another victory. But the fight was far from over. The final enemy jet had vanished into the clouds, leaving Maya with nothing but the eerie silence and the unsettling feeling that the battle was just beginning. Her helicopter systems flickered, warning lights blinking furiously as the radio remained dead. The desert night closed in around her like a suffocating blanket, and the weight of isolation pressed heavily on her chest. Maya's mind raced. She had to find a way to outsmart an enemy that seemed always one step ahead. But how do you fight a ghost? In the sky, a sudden jolt rocked the Apache, and Maya's gaze snapped to the cockpit window, where she caught the glint of a missile locked onto her position. Her hands moved on their own instincts, overriding fear as she banked sharply, pulling the helicopter into a spiraling, evasive maneuver. The missile screamed, passed narrowly, missing the tail rotor by inches, sending a shower of sparks into the night. The danger was closer than ever, and Maya knew the next few moments would decide everything. Her eyes narrowed as she searched desperately for the source of the attack in the swirling darkness above and below. But the enemy remained hidden, cloaked by the shadows and electronic interference. As the Apache dove again, Maya caught a glimpse of a faint flicker of movement high above, a shadowy shape disappearing. Behind a cloud, her breath caught in her throat. The enemy was not only relentless, but cunning, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The desert sky had become a deadly chessboard, and Maya was the only piece left to play the final move. With the lead enemy fighter jet destroyed, and the second and third jets vanished into the ominous clouds, Captain Maya Torres felt the weight of silence press against her like a living thing. The cockpit lights flickered uncertainly, and the whine of her Apache's engine seemed fragile against the vast, empty sky around her. The desert below stretched endlessly, a dark and quiet expanse, But above her, the unknown threat lurked unseen, hidden in shadows that seemed to swallow sound, and Light Maya's fingers tightened on the control stick, her eyes scanning every inch of the horizon, searching for any sign of movement, a flicker, a glint, anything that could betray the location of her elusive foes. But the sky offered nothing only. The shifting gray mist of clouds rolling in thick and fast as if to swallow her whole. The radio remained dead, and the instrument panel blinked warnings at her like a chorus of ghostly voices telling her that danger was far from over. The cold prickling sensation at the back of her neck grew stronger, as if unseen eyes were locked on her every move. The silence was deafening and oppressive, a stark contrast to the violent roar of the battle, just moments before Maya could feel her heartbeat in her. Throat every pulse a reminder that she was alone, surrounded by enemies she could not see or hear. Then, without warning, a shadow darted across the cloud cover, a faint silhouette moving with unnatural speed, disappearing before she could react. Hair on her arms stood on end. The enemy had returned, but this time they were playing a different game, one of ghosts and shadows. They had vanished into the sky only to re-emerge when she least expected it. Her targeting system flickered again briefly, showing static lines and distorted shapes before dying completely, leaving her in total darkness, but Maya refused to surrender. She switched to manual mode, relying on her training instincts and sight-scanning the clouds for any hint of movement. As she banked left, her eyes caught a glimpse of a faint trail of vapor, a telltale sign of a jet at high speed moving just beyond the edge of the clouds. Her heart surged with determination. She would not be hunted or outsmarted. She pulled the throttle forward, pushing the Apache to its limits, racing after the shadow through the dense mist, weaving between clouds as the enemy fighter zigzagged, trying to shake her off. The chase was a deadly dance with death every moment balanced on a razor edge. Suddenly, the enemy jet banked sharply, diving toward the ground. Maya followed, plunging into the swirling dust storms that rose from the desert floor. The clouds below mixed with sand and debris, creating a blinding curtain of chaos. But Maya kept her focus steady, her eyes fixed on the faint glow of the jet's afterburners cutting through the storm. Her hands moved with lightning, speed activating countermeasures and adjusting weapon systems as she closed the gap. The tension in the cockpit was electric, each second stretching into eternity as the two machines fought for dominance in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The enemy pilot was skilled, but Maya's resolve burned hotter, fueled by the lives she was sworn to protect. Then, as they emerged from the dust storm, Maya spotted her chance. The enemy fighter slowed for just a fraction of a second, enough for her to lock onto the target. Her missile tracker beeped warning, but she didn't hesitate, firing a heat-seeking rocket that soared through the smoky air with deadly precision. The explosion ripped through the sky, lighting the clouds with fire and smoke as the enemy jet spiraled down, crashing into the desert far below. Maya felt a surge of victory, but the fight was not yet over. The final enemy fighter was still out there, a shadow waiting in the clouds for the perfect moment to strike. Her helicopter shuddered as warning lights flashed frantically across the console. Systems were failing, and the radio remained dead. The desert night had deepened now, turning the sky into an endless abyss, where friend and foe were indistinguishable shadows, and every sound could be the last. Maya's mind raced, searching for a strategy to survive and win. But with every passing second, the unknown enemy seemed to tighten their grip surrounding her, like a predator circling its prey. She felt the sting of exhaustion creeping in, but she pushed it aside, knowing this was not the time to falter. A sudden burst of static on the radio startled her, signaling the faintest trace of a transmission, but the words were garbled, indecipherable, like a whisper lost in a storm. The hope it sparked was fleeting, but it reminded her she was not completely alone somewhere out there. Others were fighting too, or waiting for her next move. Then the Apache lurched violently, caught in a powerful blast that threw her off balance. Maya struggled. To stabilize the helicopter, the instrument panel flaring red warnings as the enemy closed in for a final strike. She knew the next few moments would decide the outcome of this epic battle, and perhaps her very life. Her eyes narrowed, steeling herself. For what was to come, she tightened her grip on the controls and prepared to face the unknown shadow in the sky with all the skill, courage, and grit she possessed. Because in this deadly game, the difference between victory and defeat was just one: move away. The final moments of the battle hung in the balance. Captain Maya Torres knew that every second counted. Her Apache battered and scarred her systems, flickering warnings like a dying heartbeat. The desert night swallowed the horizon, turning the world into a black void pierced only by distant stars and the glowing embers of war around her. The enemy's shadow loomed larger than ever, unseen, but felt in every shudder, every alarm in the cockpit. Her breath was steady despite the chaos. The weight of exhaustion heavy on her, but she refused to yield. This was more than a fight for survival. It was a battle for honor, for her squadron, for every soul counting on her to bring them home. She tightened her grip on the controls, eyes locked on the darkened sky, scanning for the final enemy fighter jet that had vanished like a ghost. Suddenly, the silence shattered with a violent explosion. To her left, a fiery blast erupted, tearing through the air, sending shockwaves that rattled the helicopter. The enemy had launched an ambush, a new wave of attackers hidden in the clouds, striking with brutal precision. Maya felt the Apache shudder violently, sparks flying as the canopy cracked under the assault. She forced the helicopter into a desperate dive, twisting and turning through the night sky, the roar of engines and missiles filling the air in a deadly symphony. Maya's hands moved with practiced speed, activating countermeasures, releasing flares and chaff to confuse incoming missiles. But the attackers were relentless and cunning, striking from all directions. Through the haze of smoke and fire, she caught sight of the final enemy fighter weaving through the chaos, a sleek shadow moving with lethal grace. The jet was faster, more agile, but Maya's resolve burned brighter. Her eyes narrowing as she closed the distance, the fate of the battle resting on this last encounter. With a surge of adrenaline, she launched a missile, locking onto the jet's heat signature, the rocket, streaking through the night sky, trailing smoke and fire. The enemy pilot dove sharply, trying to evade the deadly blast. But Maya anticipated the move, banking the Apache in a tight arc to maintain her target. The missile found its mark, exploding in a brilliant fireball that lit up the sky for miles. The enemy jet spiraled downward, crashing into the rocky desert floor, leaving a trail of smoke and destruction in its wake. Maya allowed herself a brief moment of triumph, but the battle was not. Yet over her, Apache's severely damaged systems flickering and warning lights blazing. A sudden jolt threw her forward. The canopy cracked deeper, and the engines groaned, struggling to stay aloft. Maya knew she had to get her helicopter back to base, fast. But the desert was vast and treacherous, communications still down, and her squadron scattered or silent. She was on her own. Her hands worked feverishly over the controls, coaxing the Apache toward safety, every inch a fight against the failing systems and encroaching darkness. But as she climbed higher toward what she hoped was friendly airspace, a new threat emerged. From the shadows of the clouds came a barrage of missiles, faster and more deadly than anything before. The night sky exploded. With light and sound, Maya dove and rolled the helicopter, narrowly missing the onslaught, the heat from the missile trails sizzling the air around her. Her heart pounded. She had no choice but to face the attack head-on, activating every defense system. The Apache possessed releasing countermeasures and firing back with the limited weapons she had left. The battle was a blur of motion and noise, an impossible dance between life and death. Then, just as it seemed the enemy would overwhelm her, the radio crackled to life, a clear voice cutting through the static, calling her by name. A rescue team had located her and was en route, but their arrival was not guaranteed. She had to survive until then. With renewed determination, Maya pushed the Apache, harder racing through the night, the weight of every missed heartbeat, every near miss fueling her resolve. The desert stretched below like an endless sea of darkness, but she would not surrender. Not now, not ever. The final moments of the battle approached. Maya could feel the enemy closing in, one last desperate assault, hanging like a storm on the horizon. But she was ready to face whatever came next with courage, skill, and an unbreakable spirit, because she was Captain Maya Torres, the female. Apache pilot who had taken down 3 enemy fighter jets in an epic aerial dogfight, and she would live to tell the tale or die trying.